Hello, I'm Cahlen Lee, and today I'm going to be upgrading or modifying my mealworm farm to a new system, which I hope is going to work better. So the first one I made probably 6 months to a year ago. It's been going for a while, and I kind of learned some lessons, and now I want to move it to this new system and see how this one goes. I don't think this one's going to necessarily be the final ideal system, but I think it's getting me one step closer to that. So let's start at the beginning. What is a mealworm? So a mealworm is basically the larval form of a beetle. And there's many different types of beetles, and these mealworms are different depending on the type of beetle. But there's a certain type of beetle or mealworm that people raise so they can feed it to their insects and things like that. The thing about this is that it's actually very healthy for humans and is said to be a much more efficient way of getting food like protein than raising large animals like cows or something like that, by I think several times more efficient. So it's kind of a cool little thing to get into if you're into being more efficient in how you're living.
In this little bowl, we have all three stages of the life cycle of this insect. So the beetle lays eggs, which hatch little worms, which are basically what this is, except way smaller, and then they grow up into this size, and this is about the size where you would want to eat them or feed them to your animals. And then if you leave these long enough, they'll turn into this. I believe this is called a pupae. And they basically become immobile for, seems like a couple of weeks, at least a week. And then they wriggle out of their casing and they're a beetle again. So that's the cycle that they go through.
So that's what they look like when they're kind of all by themselves. But now let's talk about how you actually get a farm going. What are they like all together? What are they eating? How are they living? Are they all mixed in with each other? That's actually where all the experimentation comes in. There's not actually a whole lot of information that I can find which says really how to do this really well, even though there is proof of people doing it like incredibly well, like seas of worms that you can just flow your hands through. It's like, but I think I can't find the information that says how to do it on that scale. So I'm basically just starting from scratch and trying little things and experimenting. And today I'm moving to the next step from what I had. So first, let me show you what I've been going with for the last, I don't know, 6 months to a year. These are basically, I believe, Sterilite bins, pretty deep ones. I just got them at the hardware store. What I did was, the beetles and mealworms don't like light, so I wrapped them in duct tape. And then I took little nails and I just pushed them through in the corners. And I put a little tape on there. And then when I do that, it allows me to set them on top of each other like that. And then now they have airflow coming in here, which helps with the humidity. And kind of you're saving on space, that type of thing. So that's nice, I like that about it. Here's what the beetle bin looks like. So this is where all the live ones at the moment are hiding because they don't really like the sun. But they're in there. You can see this is filled with oatmeal. And then I have some potatoes in there, and that's what they eat to get their moisture. And they basically just hang out in here and make babies. So they lay eggs, and then eventually those eggs hatch and they turn into the mealworms. So let's see if we can see any. So there's one. I mean, they're very well hidden. When I open this thing after it's been closed for a long time, it's just a sea of beetles at the top. So the idea is that as the eggs hatch, you move the beetles to another bin so that they can lay more eggs there. And I kind of got lazy and stopped doing that. And I haven't seen many mealworms, little mealworms, growing up. So I have a theory that if you leave them in there, the beetles are actually going to eat them when they're in the young stage, because the beetles definitely do eat them at the other stages, like the pupae and stuff like that. So it would make sense they would even eat something even smaller and more vulnerable. So when I move into this next system, I'm going to be more aware of that and move the beetles every couple of weeks. So they lay their eggs and then they move, and that batch can just grow up by itself. And then those are all started in generally about the same time. So they'll all mature around the same time. And I can kind of keep track of when each bin is going to become harvestable. The new system that I'm moving to is using smaller bins and actually much more less expensive bins, and you can just buy like 2 packs of these at the grocery store. I think it's like $3 to $5, and the Sterilite is probably 2 to 3 times more expensive than that. So if I'm going to go large scale, and I'm really aiming to do it as cheaply as possible, it seems like these are probably better. It also kind of solves a problem that I was experiencing with the other bins. Is it never became a problem, but if the bins got knocked over, there's no lid, so you'd have thousands of insects everywhere. So this gets us back to the lid system. So earlier I drilled holes in the top of this, and that's going to allow air to come in and also for the moisture to circulate and not build up inside, because if you get too much moisture in here, you're going to get mold, and then the food that the beetles are eating is, you know, it's got toxins and stuff like that in it. You don't want to be eating the mealworms and the beetles that have been eating that. So you want to avoid mold, so humidity is always something you got to be worried about. You also got to be worried about temperature. As it gets colder, they become less active to the point of almost inactivity. Like if you put them in the fridge, they're going to basically go to sleep. So if at a certain temperature, and I believe it's like in the 70 to 80, somewhere in that range, is when they're at their optimal. You also don't want to go too hot. So if you can keep them at that temperature, that optimal temperature, most of the time, you're going to get the fastest cycles and the most output. I'm not going to try and control my temperature too much. I will probably start worrying about that more as we get into winter. So for food, last time I just used oatmeal. I used kind of oatmeal bran at first, and then I found that the beetles had a hard time walking on that. They would get stuck upside down and stuff like that. So using the larger rolled oats instead was better for the beetles, I found. So I'm actually going to move to chicken feed instead of just oatmeal, because there's going to be more variety of nutrients and things like that. And the goal is to feed these mealworms to the chickens, and then we'll eat the eggs. And it seems like if we're willing to feed chicken feed to the chickens and then eat their eggs, that I'd also be willing to feed chicken feed to insects and then eat the insects. So this stuff is called Scratch and Peck. That's the brand. It's an organic chicken feed. This is the grower, I think, the grower variety. So the goal is to grow your chickens bigger. So my idea is that'll mean I'll get bigger mealworms more quickly. So maybe. One problem that could be with this is here, the grains are pretty big and they're pretty dry. There's a lot of smaller stuff, but I'm worried that they won't be able to chomp into those things because it won't be wet enough. But to kind of augment that and give them some food that they are familiar with, because I'm going to be transplanting into here, I'm going to actually take some of the oatmeal from the old system that probably has eggs in it too, so that's a benefit, and I'm going to mix it in here. So I'm just going to grab some of the oatmeal bran from here and sprinkle it in. Probably get enough scoop. And then I'm going to just mix it in. So the next step would be to transplant the beetles into this bin so they can start laying eggs. However, that takes a little bit of time, because what I need to do is I need to place something. Well, first I need to remove all sources of wetness from their system for probably about a day, so they'll get a bit parched. And then I'll put something really delicious in there, like maybe half of an apple or 2 halves of an apple. And they're all going to climb on top of those, and then I'm going to grab them and put them into this system. So I'll just make a video about that when I get to that step. If you want to see that, then subscribe will help out with that. And if you enjoyed the video, I hope you give it a like. Thanks for stopping by.